Well, thank you, sister. Good morning, people. I see Janelle in a vehicle, uh, driving, hopefully not driving. So you're being driven. Good, good, good. Good morning to you, my sibling, from wherever you're calling in from. Thank you for joining in this strange vocation of listening for the cracks and listening through the cracks for whatever wants to come through, especially in these times that are, in a word, painful times, right? I need not say much about the quality of experience in these days, not just here where I am. I was in India the last time last week. Um, right now, I'm in Canada in a small town called Guelph. Never heard of it until I came here. But Guelph, very nice place, actually. And I did a beautiful talk with my dear sister, Vanessa Andriotti, yesterday. Beautiful house. Um, and the reason I have to leave 15 minutes earlier is because my flight, uh, I would need to get to my flight, which takes me back home to India. Well, enough of the preamble. Welcome again. And because if any of you know about me and how I host, or rather fail to properly host these kinds of spaces, you might know that I like to invite us to greet each other. That there's something mycelial, sympathetic, in the words of Nora Bateson, about greeting each other. Yoruba people hold greeting as one of their most um, powerful acts of sociality. It's one of their most powerful art forms. It's not formally recognized as an art form, but greeting is really situated in that cosmology as a way of situating the body. So if you have the power to do so, and I think McAllister has given you the power to do so, please unmute yourselves, and not in the quick, diminishing, dismissive way in which we are trained to just say hello, and move on quickly. Not in the rituals of anonymity that the city has fostered. I would like you to take your time, look through the faces if you can, and say greetings to everyone here. Name them if you can, as many as you can. So let's do it. Can we do it as a ritual of welcome? Let's do it together.
Hello.
Hola.
Hello,
Oh, good morning, Andres.
Joy.
So beautiful to
Good
see your
morning.
face.
Good morning. Good
Good
morning.
morning.
God
Elizabeth.
bless.
Thank you for that invitation to not anonymous.
Good morning,
Thank you.
Kiki. Thank you for
Your
hosting.
faces.
Good morning, Lisa. Thank you so much for
Mhm.
hosting.
Everybody.
Hello,
Lorenzo.
hello.
Oh, beautiful to see your beautiful faces. Good morning.
Rebecca.
Wow.
Hello,
Excellent. Excellent.
Slurry.
Excellent. The noise is where the noise is where the intelligence is. The noise is where the intelligence is. Um, there's a book by uh, I think it's called I don't remember the name and title of the book. Um, it's about noise being a form of black intelligence, and not
Noise.
black as in the color of skin alone, but black as in how the world shifts from its framework, how the world constantly migrates from colonial and capture and captivity. And that is what we're engaging today. We are sitting with we're sitting with, and I want to, bring more powerfully into the room the sense in which people these days feel trapped, that their governments aren't working for them, that the international rules-based order is collapsing, that the agreements from the Second World War to mount a structure of peace, an international structure of peace, is collapsing. that economic trade is collapsing, that goodness is collapsing, right? Even the morality of goodness, that we can be good people. And if we're good enough, we can save the world. Even that thesis is collapsing for reasons that might become clearer as we go along. So what do we do in a time of collapse? Really, that is my vocation. That is my abiding question. What do we do in times of collapse? Where is the other world that we're gesturing at? The other kinds of frameworks, the more beautiful arrangements that are possible. I want to start with a story that I hope doesn't answer the question that I've just posed, but invites us to position ourselves in these times of fascism and genocide and apartheid and loss and war and pain and climate chaos. That helps us understand what might be possible, what is happening. And this story comes from my book. Well, it doesn't come from my book. It's in my book, but it comes from real life. It is an experience that I had, that we had, my wife and I, hosting or being hosted by her family. So I live in Chennai, India, as you might know. And when my daughter was 2 years old, we were visiting my wife's cousins somewhere in Chennai. And my daughter, as adventurous as she is, her name is Alethea. She's the subject of my second book, These Wilds Beyond Our Fences. Alethea wandered away from the hall where we're all gathered and playing rummy, a card game. She wandered into another room, an adjoining room, the bedroom of my wife's cousins. And she shut the door behind her. And we didn't think much of it because we thought there was no problem. We'll simply open the door. But that was not to be the case. She shut the door and we couldn't retrieve her. She started to hit the door and then we all started to panic. My mother-in-law was still alive then. I can still remember her face when she realized that we were in deep trouble, because this door wasn't the flimsy kind of door. It was the proud kind, the one that resists, that resists any kind of entreaties or prayers. We tried as much as possible to move the door, but it wouldn't budge. And my daughter was 2 years old and she was beginning to cry in the room. She was beginning to cry so loudly and she was saying things like, "I'm so sorry." She was just 2. She was saying things like, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry." She knew how to say that even then, which made our hearts break even more. The only other thing to do was to go around the door. And so I panic when it comes to those that I love, right, in danger. I panic easily, right? I held my trembling nerves and I ran downstairs, and there was a rickety, crickety, shaky, crooked ladder just around the corner. We got some men, and neighbors were beginning to gather now, you know. We got some men and they helped us put the ladder to reach the window. It was really high up, I think 3 floors up to reach the window. And I didn't allow anyone else to climb because I didn't want anyone to fall to their death and then blame it on us. I was going to climb. I was going to make the climb. And I started to climb this ladder. And of course, it was protesting my weight. It was screaming under the weight of my desperation. And I got to the window. I had hoped that the window would maybe allow me to do whatever, to at least see my daughter while she cried. I got to the window. It was barricaded by iron bars of some kind, and I could barely squeeze my hand into the frame. And there my daughter saw me and she ran to the window. and her eyes, there was something about the way she looked at me, like why she was saying many things simultaneously, two of which I could discern. One was, why would you allow this to happen to me? And the second was, I'm also sorry. I'm also sorry. I don't fully comprehend what's happening, but get me out of here. And I felt, of course, I will get you out of here. I didn't know how. Um, the danger, of course, was the thing we wanted to do was we couldn't bring her through the window. There was no way to do that, was to try to break down the door. And so my work, the plan, was to hold her by the window so that when the door comes crashing in, it doesn't come crashing in on my daughter. And so I held my daughter through the window, balancing on this angry ladder, um, and held my daughter's hand. It was just my hand. She could barely see my face through the mosquito nets. I had to pierce through that as well. I held her there, and I started to sing her favorite song. At that time, she would cringe if she knows that this was once her favorite song. She's into K-pop now. That's another conversation. But I started to sing The Wheels on the Bus Go Round and Round with my hand sticking through the window. And I encouraged her to sing with me. And I held her hand while the operation happened. Well, by and by, the door came crashing down and she was saved. And I was saved because, yeah, I wouldn't have been saved. I wouldn't have been here if I lost my daughter to something. And I tell that story because there is a sense in which we all are in a room of some kind, trapped in the room that modernity has built. We are enclosed. There's no way out. We're struggling for escape. Politics doesn't feel representational. Our formalized rituals of choosing new leaders against the promise that if only we have the right leaders, we'll be fine, we'll be better off, doesn't seem to be working, right? And so the question that we might be asking alongside my daughter, who is forever enshrined in my memory, in that room, looking at her dad, through teary eyes, saying, why wouldn't you help me? Why can't you just do something right now? I think we're all there with her, asking new kinds of worlds to show up, asking new kinds of politics to show up. My telling this story is my way of saying that we may not have a full glimpse of where we're headed, but that is a gift. That if we know exactly where we're headed, if we have more than an arm, and all we have is just an arm, all we have is a form of, let me call it an attenuated intimacy. It's an iteration, a molecule of intimacy. Like the world we seek is already here in some form, not in full-bodied form, but just as an arm stretching through a window. We don't have the full picture. We just have a part, a sense. And my invitation is to hold on to that sense that there's a lot more work happening than we can understand. And that arm through the window is a crack, is what I think of as blackness, not racialized blackness, but using the language of a particular people who were oppressed and colonized and placed under, using the language and the terminology that came from the transatlantic slave trade. I name this arm that pierces the veil of modernity. And I name this arm as a crack, not as a solution, but as an intimacy with a world that is also researching what it might yet become. This is the blackness I speak about. And my way of saying, let's begin. Not to save the world, but to hold on to those cracks as a form of politics, as a non-formalized fugitive politics. Maybe it's all we can do. Just hold on to that arm. Maybe that's all we can do. All right. I have some slides for you. I make no promises that I will get to the end of this slide. But I have it all the same. Can everyone see this? Just thumbs up? Okay, good. I don't know why I like cinematic slides, like the part 2, the black and white, right? The filmic quality of it. I'm very dramatic that way. Some have called me Beyonce. I'm just kidding. It's true. I'm kidding. I'm not kidding at the same time. I want to do some recalling just to previously on how to cook a Brontosaurus. Which I should remind you is not literally about cooking a particular Brontosaurus, but it's about doing the impossible. It's about situating agency and accountability and responsibility within a field that might consider that immeasurable, impossible, illegible, out of whack, out of the question. Cooking a Brontosaurus is impossible. Even if Brontosauruses existed now, I don't know if we'll be able to cook them or want to cook them, right? We are removed by millions of years, according to some estimates, from that kind of activity. And yet it fastens itself to our imagination speculatively as something we might yet do in these times that are just as impossible. So I started last week with a provocation that the end of the world is racial. The end of the world is racial. And there are two ways that you can understand that, each of which are just as compelling. The first is to say that what we think of as the end of the world, the ruins of modernity, the breaking down of white stability that has held our bodies aloft, what we might consider the end of the world almost always affects racialized bodies more acutely than it affects others, the dominant group. And that would be true. As I gave as an example in the last session, the pandemic, which we're still in, which is still lingering in ghostly and ghastly forms, the pandemic affected Black, brown people, and I have only data for the United States, Black and brown people, indigenous people, more potently, more grievously than it affected white people in the United States. So you can understand that statement in that way, but to leave it there would be to obscure the other poetic senses that are discernible here. The other sense is that we must reconsider race. And what I'm trying to do with race in my thesis of transraciality is to stretch what race is to unsettle race, is to suggest quite conspiratorially that what we speak of when we speak about race popularly is a stabilized, domesticated, state-sponsored version of the thing, right? That race isn't settled. That race is the ongoing vocation of how bodies are made, marked, modified, accommodated, discarded, tattooed, made legible, rendered non-legible. It's the vast saga of embodiment in how it becomes embodied, right? It's the ongoing, non-specific, provisional, always partial, cosmological, erotic, orgasmic becoming of bodies, right? So when we're speaking about race, we're speaking about something we don't understand how it began, or maybe something that refutes the notions of simple origins, and something that isn't quite available for notions of terminal points. In a sense, how we think about endings and beginnings and middles are always part of this vast field that we call race. Or as I name it here, endings of any kind are incorporeal inflections of corporeality. You know, through ancient philosophy, the Greeks always had this problem about how to think about ideas and matter, right? Idealism and materialism was fondly thought of in binary forms or in binary ways. The Stoics had a way to think it together, that ideas are material, right? They were materialists. And my work borrows from new materialisms that thinks of the world, of gods, of love, of affectivity, of futures, of temporality, of morality, of ethics in beautifully material ways. And by materiality, I don't mean physical. Not all materials are physical. So that's what we're saying here, that we are in the end of the world. We're at the end of the world. The world has ended many times before. World endings are not cessation. It's not the cessation of the world. It's the modification of a worlding project. Is where bodies take on new meanings. Even death is up for grabs when we consider race as a multi-million, multi-billion year project involving humans and more than humans. So I'm suggesting that race is a generative site where we might fruitfully consider endings. Race is a site of inheritance, debt, tragedies, trauma. Race happens there, or rather all these things happen in race. And then I brought up the subject of Blackness as a form of inheritance. Blackness as a pushing into predetermined measures, predetermined control paradigms. Blackness as a form of captivity. By inheritance, I'm suggesting, through the story I remember of Ham, Shem, and Japheth, right, last time, how I grew up in Nigeria, in the Christocentric South, believing that my skin was cursed, that the thing to do as a people was to look towards the global north in order to get instructions on how to be ourselves, right? One of the reasons why I don't even speak my language that well is because I took that thesis to its extremes. I believed myself inadequate or a second-tier citizen, and that my salvation was going to come from learning what white people knew how to do well. I inherited that. My land, my worlds are shaped by that. Of course, it's not static, it's constantly dynamic and moving, but the world I grew up in definitely had that strong thesis. This wasn't part of our last session, but I thought to slip it in here just to help us understand what we mean by Blackness as inheritance. What we mean here, we're trying to scaffold. Scaffolding kind of locks things in. Let's say we're trying to midwife the kinds of questions to stay with in these moments, because framing the right questions is half the work done, right? Hortense Spillers is one of my heroes. And she wrote the essay, Mama's Baby, Papa's Maybe, where she writes about the hieroglyphics of the flesh. She's still alive, thankfully. She's still with us. And what she means by the hieroglyphics of the flesh is to present. I'm not exactly sure what just happened. Did you all see that? Is there a cosmic cat that is here? What happened?
Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I accidentally did that.
Oh, it's fine. Leave it there. Leave it there. It reminds me of cracks. In fact, those lines, my sister, I'm not sure who you are. I just heard your voice, pardon me, but those lines illustrate exactly what Hortense Spillers is speaking about.
Yay.
So you inadvertently helped me. So let's speak about it. The markings on the flesh, right? Hortense speaks about the transatlantic slave trade and how flesh, and by flesh, she speaks about this primal thing that is prior to social conventions, prior to social constructions, this thing that is not quite available for sociality, this earthbound geosomatic thing, this body in its primal scream, right? She writes about that and how the flesh, through the technology of slavery and captivity, was productivized into a body, right? Think about that. The flesh is beaten into a body. The scream is commodified and gentrified into speech. Non-legibility is punched violently into eloquence, right? She speaks particularly about Black women whose bodies were not merely marked by history, but inscribed by it. So, as I write here, the enslaved were not only subjected and subjugated to violence, their flesh, not just their skin. So we're going deeper than phenotypic appearance. Their flesh, the pre-symbolic, the primordial, was made to bear meaning, right? Violence writing itself into the body, okay? Oh, this mark is on all the slides. Wow, impressive. Okay, let's just go ahead. Let's just go. I like it. I like it. I'm not sure how that is possible. You need to explain to me later on. So the flesh is the site of ungoverned, unprotected exposure. It is where the law meets the scream before the scream becomes speech. You know, she's talking about branding, whipping, dismembering. There are many accounts of how bodies are marked, named, archived, registered, measured. The very technology of the slave ship was the technology of measurement. I have a dear sister, and I don't know if I've mentioned this in this cohort, but her name is Professor Marisol de la Cadena. And I remember one of those private conversations we had many years ago, where this idea of Black flesh being imported into the human emerged between us. So basically what she said and what she echoed back to me was, Bayo, I think that Africans were imported to support the thesis of the human. And she's trying to say here that the human is not just the anthropomorphic shapes that we're used to. She's not speaking about isolated humans. She's speaking about the human as an ecology of practice. She's speaking about the human as a flattening of worlds. She's speaking about the human as a more than human enterprise, a coalescing and a convening of concept and technology and tools and ancestrality and phallic towers and all of that to create a kind of world, right? And she said, certain kinds of bodies of flesh were imported by way of being beaten into a body and marked to support this world building project. And I agree. So when Hortense Spillers speaks about a hieroglyph, right? If you can imagine the hieroglyph, the Egyptian symbols on those pyramids and on those structures, she's saying that those things were inscribed. Those symbolic structures were inscribed on Black flesh to render them legible within the economies of relations that white stability claimed for itself. But then she goes on to say, and this is the interesting part, that because the reason why she names it a hieroglyph is because hieroglyphs are largely non-discernible, right? You've seen those inscrutable marks, and some of them made up in movies, right? And then this expert leans in and tries to read what the symbols are suggesting. Like, don't open the casket of the Pharaoh. Run away, white people, and stop being in movies where you're waking up things that are dead for thousands of years. Well, that kind of inscrutability, non-legibility, is also salvific and emancipatory in the imagination of Hortense Spillers, because she suggests that something about flesh, black flesh, though it is marked and cut and owned, it refuses full legibility. It will not be fully available. You cannot read it entirely. Something resists full readability, something that the colonizer cannot decode. And she says, it's this something, it's this place of trembling resistance that becomes the thesis of emancipation, that becomes the subversion of the American grammar, right? The American grammar is to take the black body, or rather the flesh, and render it legible within the sentence of embodiment. Is to say, this is the way we will see you. This is the way we will hold you. We will include you in power. So I want you to notice that even benevolent acts of friendship, of support, of solidarity could still work within the logic of legibility, right? That I will help you. I will give you a home. I will give you a place. It's well-intentioned, it's good, but it still works in that field of representation. And Hortense Spillers wants to move beyond representation. She wants to move away from signification and meaning, because she suggests that meaning is violent. Meaning is violent. Or as Saadia Hartman suggests, that fact is the state's preferred fiction, right? There's something about the reductionism that drags us and anchors us to fact or to meaning that obscures the other ways that the world is becoming. That's Hortense Spillers. So think with the hieroglyphics of the flesh. Think with that idea of blackness as inheritance, blackness as this pummeling of the flesh so that it fits the pre-cut Procrustean format of the body, right? And then you might recall the story that I told from the Nigerian playwright Olarotimi, adapted after Sophocles' Oedipus. You know, the story of a boy born into prophecy. And this prophecy basically says, well, when you're of age, you will kill your father, you will marry your mother, and you will have kids with your mother. It's the most tragic form, is the most tragic outcome you can imagine, I guess. And Olarotimi takes this story and renders it in Yoruba language. Well, not Yoruba language, but Yoruba cosmology, and writes a play about it. And it's a popular, at least in Nigeria, it's a very popular story, thanks to Olarotimi. So as I write here, Odewale, who's the tragic figure in that account, is a kind of archetype of blackness. He's beaten into prescripted meanings that violently upend ideas of agency. But there was something written between the lines of Olarotimi's play, because I think that even him refused the entire algorithm of tragedy. He was suggesting, I dare say, alongside Hortense Spillers, that even within tragedy, there is a molecule of emancipation, right? There are trembling sites of resistance that escape full disclosure. The flesh is not fully available for colonial usefulness. I dare say even Sophocles did not fully accept the format of tragedy, because the story of Oedipus has a sequel in which he moves to Colonus and he dies a beautiful death. And he's actually honored by the heroes, the Greek heroes of that time. And so it is here in this in-between space where we are imposed upon, where there's a boot on my neck, where I'm being strangled in the ways that George Floyd was strangled. And yet, in that asphyxiation where he's murdered by justice, he's able to see his mama, and he's able to reach out his hand and call out to his mama, right? That he's able to hold just in the same ways that Alethea held my hand through that window. He also reaches out to the hand of his mother as his neck is being compressed. That archetype is politics today. That the thing we have depended on is now strangling us. And we have to locate agency, not fully or exclusively in the boot or in wrestling with the boot, but in that tiny infra-thin space that Hortense Spillers intuited, the place of the crack, or that Olarotimi noticed, the space, the trembling place between the lines of his brilliance. So that's where we locate our question today then. And I hope you followed me in the building of the conditions for asking this question, which is, what else can the body do when power forgets its name or cannot see completely? What else can we do when power forgets that it is powerful? When the boot cannot quench my mother's love for me? What does it mean to slip away? What does it mean to hold on to the hand, the attenuated hand that breaches the window? What does it mean to long for new kinds of worlds when the very act of longing itself is becoming criminal? That is what we want to stay with. I really do love these lines. And so the lines appear to me as a disruption of full legibility, right? It's a minor gesture in the field that says, you will not read me completely. You will not make me fully available. There's something here that doesn't want this to be entirely elegant. Those are cracks. Those are minor gestures. Those two lines are the trickster showing up. So my sister, thank you again. So we're speaking about the remnant that evades the measuring tape, the primal scream that will not be beaten into speech. And that's what I call blackness, people. And I distinguish this between blackness, which is capitalized most of the time, right? Almost like a honorific title, almost as a way of apologizing for slavery. It's constantly capitalized. But I render this one in uncapitalized fonts, in small fonts, in lowercase, to make the case that this blackness is not committed to identity, nor is it about identity. It's what slips away from what can be identified. So this blackness isn't about Black people and their claims to power and their claims to history and their stories of inheritance and their stories of trauma. It's not about that. It is connected to those accounts, but it is not committed to staying within there. It is what happens when blackness spills away from legibility, from the grammar of justice. This is the reason why I named this blackness as ungrammatical. It doesn't bend to the rules, and yet it is what rules are indebted to. It is paraontological, and I think I must take 1 minute to say something about paraontology, which informs my work heavily. Paraontology is a way of contesting the claims of ontology. Ontology is a study of being. is how we story and philosophize and have conversations about what exists and what doesn't, what is permitted to be proper and what cannot be proper. For instance, humans exist. Spaghetti-tipped aliens with fish brains and spotted mandibles. I'm not sure, right? So they would not be as ontological, if you will, as ChatGPT or as the lamp on my table or as this table, right? Ontology is concerned with what is. And as a result, by consequence, it is concerned with what isn't. Western ontology has been framed in this way. But the thing is, Western ontology is highly political, right? It might appear or it might present itself as a neutral concern with what exists, but it is an active sieve, a sorting mechanism for the kinds of bodies that are proper and the kinds of bodies that are not allowed to be proper, right? So we're saying with paraontology that ontology is not enough. In fact, alongside Hortenspillus, ontology is violent. Ontology is violent. That notion of being obscures the world in its becoming. The reason why paraontology is committed to process is because if it sticks to identity, then it is trapped. It is trapped in ontology. Let me see if I can really situate that. It's like arm wrestling for a seat at the table, while forgetting that there are other spaces of power beyond the house that hosts the table, right? And that is the ways, this speaks to the ways that activisms, civil rights, justice, so-called, all these matters are framed within stabilized ontologies. The reason why we want to step away from, at an apophatic distance from ontology, is to suggest that what presents itself as being hides other kinds of possibilities. That being is not all there is. I remember being a younger man, a boy, teenager, becoming an undergrad, and I was going to a Christian university, and I was being interviewed for this position. I was the first set of this private Christian university in Nigeria, and I spoke at length about the things I wanted to study. My first discipline of choice wasn't actually psychology. I wanted to be a theologian, right? This is why it fit the idea of going to a Christian university. I wanted to be a theologian, but their theological department wasn't as well. There are not many theologians in that regard in Nigeria. And so they didn't have a credible department of theology, if you will. So I opted for psychology. But in this intake interview, if you will, the interviewer was questioning my bona fides, my Christian bona fides. At this point, I was already asking questions that would be considered dangerous by the church. And I remember saying something about God and his existence. And the interviewer said to me, "You know that God exists, don't you? And God made everything." And I remember saying back to him, "I understand that, but everything is just a small part of what I'm interested in." That was a paraontological remark. Everything is just a small part of what I'm interested in. I bracketed everything and said, there's something more. This is paraontology. Paraontology is not committed to who gets on the stage. Most of our works, our resistances, our politics is on the stage. Fascism against the left, the right versus the left, this versus that. All of that happens on the stage. Paraontology is not seeking sides. Paraontology is the very upending of the stage, right? It is the drift of the grounds of perception. As I write here, it is not a new photo within the frame. It is the crack on the wall that holds up frames and their inserted photos. This blackness that I speak of, therefore, is not the blackness that seeks rights. It doesn't dismiss that either, right? There is a blackness that needs to seek rights. This is its logic. It needs to pay the bills. It wants someone that looks like it in the White House or in any state of power, as power is popularly and neurotypically framed. But this blackness I speak of is autistic. It's not neurotypical. It doesn't travel in straight lines. It doesn't live on the highway. It doesn't live in apartments. It lives in the bushes. It cuts across transversely. It's a wild god. It doesn't seek representation. It slips away. It sneaks in. I write here that the footfalls of its erotic passing are registered in terms of tensions and thresholds and tendencies and cracks. That's the only way you know this blackness is passing. I tell the story of issue all the time to help us understand this paraontology, this blackness, this ungrammatical thing that is the space of this non-formal politics that I'm working with and I'm inviting people to work with around the world, right? This is issue. And in the book that I'm writing at the moment called An Ocean of Milk, A Parable of Love in 3 Numbers, I'm not going to give you the whole deal. I want you to read the book. It's really exciting. It's the most fascinating piece of writing that I've ever done. And it's still emerging. But in this account, I tell the story of how Eshu learned to be two. Okay? Eshu in the mythologies told by the Yoruba people is capable of dividing himself. He's not just, Eshu. There are many issues. There are multiple issues. So I'm telling the backstory of how he learned to do this. And it has to do with the transatlantic slave trade. That when the slavers came, the Orishas, which refers to all the gods and goddesses, and ancestors, and spirit beings, mounted up an insurgency and fought. Originally, and here's how I'm twisting that tale, originally, Eshu fought alongside the others. But Eshu at that time had the power to go back in time. There's a poem that says Eshu throws a stone tomorrow and kills a bird yesterday. So this guy knows how to time travel. Right? It's written in our poetry, our sacred poetry, that Eshu throws a stone tomorrow and kills a bird yesterday. Right? So he knows how to go back in time. So in my account of things, Eshu fights alongside the Orishas and quickly finds out that victory is too risky. And so he keeps on going back in time, like a loop. Who here plays video games where you have a checkpoint? Anyone here? Video games? No? Not wrong crowd. Sorry. I deeply apologize. If video games traditionally have checkpoints. If you're traveling along the line like Super Mario, you want to save your progress. That's what it's called. You have momentum. You save your progress at what is traditionally called a checkpoint, so that if you're killed, you don't go back to the start. You go back to that checkpoint. And you could be in that loop forever, or as long as you want to play that game. Right. Eshu went into the future alongside his Orishas and found out, oops, if we fight back, this happens. So he goes back to his checkpoint to try to find another way to fight and keeps going back because he summarily finds out that there's no way to successfully fight against the colonizers without repeating the thesis of colonization. Does that make sense? Eventually, he gives up on fighting and he realizes that fighting is part of the problem because fighting is still part of the ontology of mastery, right? It's not to say fighting is wrong. We're not binarizing here. It's just that fighting risks too much. Lean upon a wall long enough and you take on the shape of the wall, right? And so he slips away. It must have been startling to his siblings, the other gods and goddesses, to see their brother running away from the battlefield and not understanding that he has fought this battle 1,000 times and knows that it doesn't lead anywhere interesting. And so he slips away, right? And he slips into, in my telling of this book, into this para-real or para-terranean space where he meets a giant snake, a robot, and a goddess that has no name. I'm not going to tell you the whole story. But this idea of slipping away is how paraontology works. It cannot stay within the frame. It has to spill and leak and slip away from view. And that's what blackness does. To understand blackness, we see it as a counter-colonial force that distresses a field and its claims to fixity, right? A counter-colonial force that distresses a field. We don't start when we think in process or in terms of immanence. We don't start from things as they already exist. We start from relationship, right? I want you to understand that we don't even start from worlds. We start from chaos. A field that is constantly differentiating its own difference. A differentiating difference. A field, you can imagine a molten field that never quite coalesces into a stable form. But it is from this field that form emerges. It is from this field that bodies become informed. It is from this field that information becomes possible. So this sweltering, more than human, immanent field that produces difference, that is difference in itself, is blackness, is what Nora Bateson, my dear sister, with whom I've been doing some diffractive work, and I will present some of that work here as well. This is what we call sympathy. It's a learning together. There's no stabilized structure anywhere that is not already moving. Even being as a structure is constantly subject to the wear and tear of becoming. And how becoming interacts with being is what we name blackness. Blackness is a sidling of Western ontologies and their commitments. I wish I could do a reading of Black Anarchy, but this workshop hopefully didn't promise too much. It can only give a sliver, a molecule of the insights that are emerging right now. Blackness is disarchitecture. I had to make that word up to suggest that it's not a building, it's what shifts the building, right? I don't know how many of you have ever visited a haunted space, right? A haunting in itself is the drift of architecture. I'm reading a book that I just recently got called The Sanctified Church by Zora Neale Hurston, where she travels and she receives these wisdoms and insights like the tortoise received the wisdom of the world by traveling through mythology. She receives these insights on medicine and ghosts and architecture and everything from Black folks in the antebellum South. Blackness is not architecture, is disarchitecture, is the dissing of architecture. It's not possession. No one possesses it. No one group of people possesses it. It's not something to be had. It's not property. It's the very condition by which those terms can become legible. It's dispossession. It's the unworlding of worlds. It's the relinquishing of atomized subjects, a situating of agency within the field. It's within the context of small b blackness that I'm able to say to people that humans don't make decisions. It's a controversial thing to say because modernity has habituated us into thinking that we make decisions, that decisions come from within our brains, and that we as stabilized selves look upon the world through the lenses of worldview. And all we need to do is adopt the right worldview. It's a very humanizing, anthropocentric perspective. But to notice the field is to notice that no, the field is speaking, right? Or as Deligny says, it is not the spider that makes the web, it is the web that makes the web. I love that remark, right? Blackness loosens the thread that has been woven too tightly around stable entities. And therefore, it's a poetics of relations, to adopt the phrasing of Edouard Glissant. It is a poetics of relations. It is about relationality. It is paraontology. Let me pause here just for 1 minute, and in the spirit that what is given cannot be fully given and only appears anyway partially. And also to catch up my breath and to allow us to catch ourselves, if only for a moment, in the flow of things. And I would allow for one sibling just to speak or mark this moment. It's not a question per se, but just to trace, just to mark to the tree in this forest that we're navigating, this choreography of becoming lost that is ours to explore. So if you'd like to just say something, what is surfacing in this moment, not to integrate everything and say, I get it, or I don't get it, just to name where you are at the moment, then please unmute yourself if you can do that. And if not, we'll just, okay. iPhone raised hand is what I see on my screen.
Is that me? Is that Cynthia? Do you see me?
No, I don't see you, but go
Well,
ahead.
you can just hear me.
I can hear you. That's good. That's
Okay,
good.
well, this just reminded me of something. I think that I'm in a crowd that really probably knows about Tonglen practice in Tibetan Buddhism. Usually, like breathe in the bad air, breathe out the good, right? Well, Tonglen practice in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition is one of the practices of loving kindness, in which you breathe in the negativity and cook it and transmute it and then release it as a prayer into the world. And so, when we think about the blackness and whiteness, we think about those tropes.
Yeah.
And so at a point in which I was really interested in Tibetan Buddhism, I wrote this, and this is what it is. And I just share it because it's what has been running through my mind. Here is the Tonglen practice to flip the script. Breathe in the searing, sorry, it disappeared for me. Well, that's okay. Breathe in the searing, hot, impossible coldness and impossible hotness, the white hot pain. And breathe out and lay that in the lap of loving kindness. And breathe out the divine blackness, star splattered and cool, as a prayer for all of us. So that's how I think about it. I think about what you're talking about in like this alchemical way. So I know that my understanding is very partial because I don't understand Western philosophy well enough to know what you're actually doing with it. But that's where I'm at right now.
Thank you. Thank you, sister. Thank you. I love that you frame this within alchemy and you see it as a matter of entrainment. It does lend itself to those kinds of binaric imaginaries or imaginations to suppose, and I'm not speaking to exactly what you said, I'm just thinking along with you. Some might suppose that blackness is the opposite of whiteness, or that it is used in that way. And yes, there is a risk in the languaging. There is a stress, there is a weakness in languaging anything, especially when you speak about blackness and whiteness. It lends itself to that kind of binary. This isn't, the language isn't pure, okay? It doesn't come from above. It is framed within history. It is framed within yearning. It is framed within longing, right? And desire. But no, whiteness is not the opposite of blackness. Blackness has no opposites. In fact, I would dare say that whiteness is a form of care, okay? This isn't even a pathologization of whiteness. And I'm not even speaking about white people. I'm speaking about the world-building, world-destroying Wendigo cybernetics. The ways that the world is constantly destroyed. I am saying that that isn't evil. That when you get to the language of evil, you've kind of locked things up where they cannot travel any longer. There's nothing much you can do with the notion of evil except to kind of destroy it. But that risks too much. That's what lends itself to cancellation politics. Evil is already a reductionism. I cannot think about whiteness in that way. I have to think of it as through history, not ahistorical, but through history as a form of care. That maybe the traces of what we name now as whiteness or as white modernity or as neurotypicality or as ableism started with a mother in Neolithic eras and worlds embracing her son or keeping her son or her child safe from a dinosaur or something like that. Something as outrageous as that. But the world itself is outrageous. So why not speculate? That when care slowly becomes asphyxiation, then we're in trouble. So this is a troubling of whiteness, not as evil, but as a form of care that now lends itself to the elision, to the dismissal, to the abject discardation of a world that might help it live. In other words, our work is not to get rid of whiteness. It is to learn how to teach it, is to teach it how to tremble. It's not to get rid of white people or to save them, or to tell them that they have to be nicer. That's all on the stage, is to lean into the cracks where whiteness misbehaves, where whiteness does not fully comprehend itself. And that's part of the alchemy you're saying, sister. Whiteness is blackness that is stabilized. Whiteness is blackness that has crystallized into regulation. Blackness is the flow, the erotic, ethical flow. Whiteness is when it becomes an ice cube, when it is cold, when in its form of caring, it becomes a plantation. Thank you for that remark again, sister. Let's take just a 2-minute bio break. I'm learning to be sensible and sensitive to, or else I could just spill along. But let's take a bio break and a bio break. Okay, just 2 minutes and we'll be right back. Okay, I'll stop my share for now and then we'll be back. Sister, is it possible we just have some music for the break? Some elevator, no, it's not elevator music. This Ethiopian beautiful music, not elevator
I'll
music.
try.
Thank you, sister. 2 minutes only. We'll be back. So I don't know why I left this example in to try to explain paraontology, but I've used this example many times. I will skip it. I'll leave it be for now because of time. I think my stressing of other examples, the slipping away, the idea that the field is what is operational. Let me put it this way, inspired by this example, which I will not tell. I'm very tempted to share it. And some of you already know it, this story. But the para in paraontology, the para is what ontology has to repress in order to be itself, right? That is, in order for the world to exist, there is a sense of externality in the existing, right? In order for the world to exist, to stand out, right? It needs, there are several operations, dynamic operations that are at work that mimic the operations of and the logics of coloniality and enslavement, right? Is that the public is not as neutral as you think it is. So there's a phrase in Black studies called the Black outdoors, or the Black public, that a Black child in the United States, where his white counterpart might see a tree, a Black child may be in touch with a lynching, right? That a tree is not a tree any more than a cigar is a cigar. An admission that would make Freud happy, right? That a tree is not a tree. That there are things that have had to be suppressed in order for the tree to behave as if, oh, I'm just a tree. But it is not just so. It is haunted. And so this example just speaks to the idea of a field that is at work, a field where we locate the decisional, that we're not self-regulating automatons as we understand ourselves to be. We're not self-regulating, isolated individuals. That the colors you take on today, the choices you made for your breakfast, if you've had breakfast, I haven't, but the breakfast you had this morning, the life choices that you've made, some you regret, some you celebrate, are not entirely reducible to the thing you rudely call you. That the self is a vocation that travels, that spills beyond our lifetimes. That to be alive is to carry other life forces within us. And we are not limited to our duration, the duration of our breath. Other worlds, other temporalities, other timelines live quite literally in our bodies. I often offer the example of the Hiroshima explosion in 1945, and how the radioactive materials from that settled in flesh everywhere, almost like a hieroglyphics of the flesh, marking dolphins and water bodies and plants, and by default, humans who feed on these things as well. And so we carry trace elements of 1945 in our bodies. 1945 is here in 2025, right? We are not in charge. Blackness teaches that. And it lends itself to a different kind of art in times of pain. But let's go ahead. I want to introduce this field of learning together. And I want to use the language at the moment that Nora Bateson, my dear sister, is offering. I could as well use the language of immanence, of Deleuze, but I really like what happened in my recent explorations at Esalen. I had this retreat there, this co-exploration with other siblings, and I did some diffractive reading into Nora's thesis. So Nora suggests that there are no stable structures. She wants us to see a field. She wants us to see the forest where we're likely to see an individual tree, right? She wants us to notice that the state, monogamy, uh, the bank, education, marriage, all these institutions are not as fixed or as stable, or even the idea of the citizen subject, even the idea of the human, none of these are fixed. They only appear to be fixed, right? They appear to be immobile, but they're dynamic. I have a word for this. It's called morphostasis, that everything that appears to be still is actually practicing stillness. Think about that. This practice is already a dynamic quality, right? It's a delayed effect of becoming in its passing, right? Take a stone, a phone, a key, whatever. It looks still, unperturbed, impervious, but it is dynamic. I mean, if only we're to stick to a physical description, those molecules are dancing all over the place. They're doing the Macarena, right? So even stillness is not still. Even stillness is inseminated with a dynamic beating quality, a rhythm. And this is what Nora is saying about what she calls sympathy, that we learn these structures. These structures are co-learning. There's a co-intelligence that renders us possible. The world is co-learned, not from positions of completeness, but through co-emergence in the generative incapacity of entities to be fully themselves. You are not complete by yourself. Race is the failure of bodies to fully form. Remember, I said that in the last session. Love is this failure, but I'm getting ahead of myself. That the world is in this processual becoming. It never quite arrives. Even utopia hides under the blanket of stasis, but it is dynamic, it is political, it is moving, right? Even heaven is contested, right? Even God moves. And this is Nora's thesis. We learn with each other. We emerge in the learning, right? We're learning all the time. We're learning from structures. Structures are learning from us. We're learning from AI systems. AI systems are learning from us. We're learning from furniture. Furniture is learning from us. We're all learning together. And we don't predate this learning. We emerge in the relationship, right? So being is the delayed effect of relational differentiation. Sympathy. Now, what else can we say about sympathy? It's the mutual dance of co-learning. I have a word, panraism, which means all flowing. It is the panraic dance of co-becoming, all things flowing into each other. It is a learning together. It is morality in its grid lines and holding, right? I go on to suggest that sympathy works by accommodation. And by accommodation, I mean to say this. Forget the text I've written there for a moment. I mean to suggest that that everything that is because it has been accommodated. I'm presently writing an essay called The Writer. What did I call it? I've not settled on a title, but it's something along the lines of The Writer Never Existed. And it's my way of coming to grieve the loss of my claims to authorship in the digital age. I'll say a little bit more about that. That one thing that I shared this yesterday, well, one thing that I pride myself in secretly, I don't betray this pride publicly. You know, one has to give an appearance of being humble. One thing I pride myself in secretly, but not so secretly at this time, is that I write well. I like to write. I'm grapho compulsive. I need to write. And I write in such a way as to admire a sentence that has come through as if it were not my own. for a long time after I've written it, I've been known to stare at my own scripts. No, this isn't some narcissistic thing happening here. It's just a nerd who is fascinated by beauty and the beauty of language. But if you've watched the movie Amadeus, who's watched that movie? It came out in 1984. Right, good, good. So that's this audience. Okay. Mental note, not video games. Use more 1984 movies. Okay. There is a scene where Antonio Salieri, this magisterial composer and great musician, is receiving the scripts, the compositions of this upstart called Amadeus Mozart, and he's looking at it. And the person who brings these compositions tells him quite stunningly that those scripts, that music was composed firsthand without correction, one take. And Salieri is disgusted. He literally breaks down. He takes it, the compositions, and it's such a beautiful movie. The director allows us to hear what he's hearing. He can hear the music. He's one of the few who could read music and hear it. And the actor who plays him, I do not remember his name now, is spirited away in the rapturous beauty of what he's hearing. And he drops it. And his future self is narrating that moment, saying it was like he was sensing God. Now, I have come recently into certain kinds of relations with the field of the text. By the field of the text, I mean I'm encountering other people's writing. And I realized that a lot of people are writing with AI. Okay. And I know this because of the M dash. This is my favorite punctuation mark. The M dash that appears in texts. It's how I know. It's how I detect if someone has used ChatGPT or some other large language module to write. And I found myself of late bitterly pointing that out. I'm being very vulnerable here because I felt insecure about it. Because like Salieri reading the musical genius of Mozart, I've encountered texts that are so utterly beautiful, but produced by AI. And I've been softly crippled by that because it's my trade. It has been my thing, right? It was my thing. I claimed it for myself. I told myself I can write well. And then all of a sudden, it has been democratized to oblivion. Everybody's writing with their punctuations in place. And I'm jealous of that. I'm jealous. I'm angry. I'm like, how dare you write a good sentence? That used to be just me. I'm just being confessional here. Right? And I'm writing about it. But I've stopped myself, you see, that's not the end of the story or this essay that I'm writing. I catch myself in this drift and I realize maybe it wasn't yours in the first place. Maybe the author has never been you. Maybe it was only you because the conditions of those moments accommodated you as a stable identity, the owner of this skill or this gift. But the world is constantly moving and we must move at its pace. And now it is possible for anyone to write a paper, I've just learned, to develop a scientific paper just by punching in a few coordinates in ChatGPT. That drifts and shapes the entire field of learning and education and who gets to write. So I'm learning, I'm grieving at this moment. I'm being called to grieve this shifting field of accommodation. But that's what I mean by accommodation. We are what we are because we are accommodated. Oh, I'm a writer. It's not because you have an essence of writing, but because you're accommodated by technology, by relations, by certain concepts of the self, by civilization, by furniture, by understandings of gendered presence. You're accommodated within the matrix, the sympathetic field, to be that thing, but it is not to be stabilized once and for all. Okay, so accommodation is how I think about the viscosity of bodies in their fields of relations, which captures the fluid, interconnected nature of embodiment. Accommodation wants us to understand that these things are diffracted into the field, but they come together once in a while and they give us the identities we claim. But identity itself is a holding cell, is a holding place. The world is larger, much more compelling than identity. So I say here that sympathy works by accommodation. Bodies are accommodated, and that's how they become embodied. Deleuze famously spoke about bodies without organs, right? But when they become organed, right, then that's because they're accommodated. They've been hosted. We are because we are hosted. It's not I am because I think, or I think, therefore I am. It is I am because I have been accommodated by the others. Okay? And following deeper into this idea is the notion that accommodation bleeds into two kinds of processes. I will share these slides with us. I will not get to the end of this. It's always an attempt, always a tentative gesture. One process is called dysympathecy. The other is aposympathecy. And very quickly, dysympathecy is when a field of accommodation becomes an institution. Remember what I said about asphyxiation? When an embrace becomes a chokehold, right? This is what Nora might think of as cold data. When the world in its resonant field congeals into meaning, right? The world exceeds meaning, but when it's gentrified into signification and symbology, then we're talking about dysympathecy. It's how things become things. But that is never at a distance from another kind of operation that is constantly working, which I call aposympathecy. Apo means away from, and I'm trying to suggest that there are qualities and tendencies in this field that unworlds the worlds that are being made. This is where the trickster lives. The trickster is aposympathetic. It's a mouthful, I know, but we're struggling with language here, and language is never enough. So forgive the clunkiness of philosophic conceptualization. It's always never quite enough. It's always not there. But this is not designed or conceptualized to be fastened for all time. There are provocations to get us to think alongside, okay? So the aposympathetic is how the world flies away from itself, how it forgets its own imperatives. This is where blackness lives. This is where blackness lives. Blackness is the unworlding of dysympathecy. In the field of accommodation, there are these tendencies at work, these hidden tendencies. They're not visible, they're not available for legibility, but they're there in a virtual sense. And sometimes this virtuality crystallizes into what I call a crack. But the tendencies themselves are blackness. Blackness is a field of tendencies that upends coloniality's claim to exclusivity. Okay. Right. It's like the crossing of a wild god, a story that I wrote a few months back, but I will not tell now. I also will skip the kintsugi exercise, or not exercise, just a way of situating cracks as an evolution, or rather an emergence of blackness, as a sign of blackness in its moving. But to think about blackness is to think about cracks. The footsteps of blackness is cracks. That's where you hear the footfalls of blackness in its passing. Cracks are the onto-epistemological ruptures where other patterns might leak through. Onto is ontological. That is, cracks are ontological. That is, they are disturbances in the field of being. They're also epistemological. That is, they're disturbances in what can be known. And so we put them together and say onto-epistemological. Cracks are how what can be known and what is constantly being ruptured. And I really want you, my siblings, to understand that this is where a different kind of politics takes root. I really want you to understand in this time of conflagrations and pain that we might fight, and fighting has taken different forms. Resistance will take different forms. But there is always the danger, as Ishu noticed quite early, of winning. And that if we win, we might repeat the logic of what we're fighting. And so there is an invitation to settle into where Blackness takes us to. And I tell the story of Blackness in its slippages by situating the notion of cracks, right? Cracks are the monstrous ruptures where there once was a flat, smooth terrain, right? And this work of staying with the crack is what I call parapolitics. The work of staying with the cracks, the work of not closing the opening, but of following it in a weird fidelity, of pursuing this tendency, of refusing to collapse it back to familiarity, of following where it might lead. And cracks always lead to the ocean, people. Cracks are the choreography of the oceanic. They don't come to the shore. Cracks always take us to the ocean, away from the shore, away from legibility, away from stabilized futures. And maybe that's where we want to be, right? In the indeterminate. Cracks take us to the sea, but in taking us to the sea, we will risk seasickness. And I wish I had a third session to go into seasickness and what I mean by seasickness. But to stay with cracks is to stay with the nausea of not fitting in. And you might already feel this in your body, is to stay with the discomfort of not realizing or seeing a stabilized future ahead of you, right? Is to stay with the discomfort of not even recognizing yourself any longer, of leaning outside of morality itself and risking the scandal of being labeled as bad, right? Cracks break morality. They deterritorialize it. They take us away from the shore towards the ocean, to what else might emerge from there. And that is difficult art. That is difficult work. It is non-formal. I call it parapolitics. So dysympathy, just to come back to that field, is when the vibrancy of relations become cold. Vanessa offered a very brilliant example yesterday. She said she's tried to distinguish between momentum and vitality. A lot of our politics is devoted to momentum, right? We want things to be regularized. Think about people who create or want to create, with their beautiful intentions, safe spaces, right? And we need safe spaces. I need it, right? But there's something about the blueprint of these actions and gestures and practices in how they unfold that may add to momentum. There's something about momentum that is spoken or that is legible when we tell stories of our struggles for justice. It lends itself to the account of momentum. But momentum is also very possibly a trap. Progressive politics might think in terms of momentum, oh, we're getting closer. We're about to achieve our goals. But that is also on the ontological stage. Vitality is something much more noisy, is noisier than momentum. It doesn't have a single track of progress. In fact, it's uncomfortable. It's when something gets in the way of what we deem to be the future. It's seasickness. Right? And so dysympathy is that space of blackness. It's a space where we learn to come to touch. And cracks, my people, cracks are not tattoos. You don't own cracks either, right? They're always speculative, of course. they're virtual. That doesn't mean they're not real. But because they are pre-real, they are virtual. Okay. There's something about naming cracks or entering into fields where we host our cracks, our failures to fully show up, that allows perception to move. I'm very interested in that. Okay. A crack is the system's moment of forgetting itself. It is a trace of a prior that never had presence. It is fugitive sympathy. It is not a lack of connection. It is the intensification of connection. It is autistic. I see we're coming close to the time where I will have to join my plane, with apologies for ending so abruptly. But I want to end on a note, and there's much more. See, look. Notice, see, there's a lot more work. It never made it here. Look at it. Look at it. Look at it. There's a lot more, and I will share the slide. Wait, maybe I'll send the slides in PDF format for all my siblings here.
That would be great.
Yes, but I wanted to end on this note that I typed out this morning, that we are following the leaks. Blackness is a promising emancipatory politics of getting lost. The Yoruba people say, in order to find your way, you must get lost. I suggest with the title again that our work is not to merely fight back because we risk winning. Our work is to cook the impossible, is to stay with the trouble and to find each other in those cavernous spaces of the impossible where new kinds of projects can emerge. Our work is not success, not entirely. Our work cannot look like victory, not entirely. Our work is listening to the cosmic fires that burn amidst, the fireplaces of ontology. So we're not offering a new governance platform. This is not strategy. This is not how to seize power from the fascists. It's how to stay with the haunting. It's how to meet the ghosts of modernity as the world ends. And the world is proliferating so many ghosts as it ends. White modernity is proliferating ghosts. Let's not lock up those ghosts. Let's have conversations with them. Those ghosts are our failures. Those ghosts are how we are asking questions about what it means to be a parent in the Anthropocene. Those ghosts are the field of perception curdling just a little bit for us to notice the world differently. And in meeting artistically those ghosts, in decorating and libating their presences and absences, some kind of parapolitics takes root. And we will not save the world with a parapolitics, because parapolitics is not about saving the world. Parapolitics is about disturbing the idea that there is a world to save. Parapolitics is about suggesting that there are possible other configurations, if only we lean into the perceptual cracks that are emerging around us. It's an unfurling contagion, a fungal diffusion, a wayward echo. It loves like laughter in a room where no one remembers the joke. It dwells where legibility dies. It is not against the political, it sours it lovingly. And that's where I must end. I must end here. And thank you. This is not the end of our vocations. My dear sister Wei and I are conspiring to create other things like this on the McAllister platform of this distinguished professorship, and to do other things like this, and to make it open for us so that the public can participate. So there's a lot of work that has gone into this. I must end with gratitude. Thank you, Wei. Thank you, my sisters. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you very much to McAllister College for inviting me to do this. It was a trial, and there's more to come. And our learning continues together. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you all. Have a wonderful weekend. Safe travels, Bayo.